paintings here at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Before we get to the talk by Sally, our Assistant Curator of Photography, I just want to remind all of you that this lecture is the 10th in a series this year celebrating the collections housed here at the Legion of Honor, which, as you may know, is celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2024 to 2025. So please do come back on the second Saturday of each month to learn a bit more about treasures here at the Legion that belong to all San Franciscans. Before getting started, I will share our institutional land acknowledgement. The Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco occupy unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of other Ohlone peoples, as well as the Miwok, Yakuts, and Patwin. We acknowledge, recognize, and honor the indigenous ancestors, elders, and descendants whose nations and communities have lived in the Bay Area over many generations and continue to do so today. We respect the enduring relationships that exist between indigenous peoples and their homelands. We are committed to partnering with indigenous communities to raise awareness of their legacy and engage with the history of the region, the impacts of genocide, and the dynamics of settler colonialism that persist. Lincoln Park, where the Legion of Honor was founded in 1924, operated as city cemetery from 1868 until 1898. When the park was created, many of the burials were relocated, but the majority were not. Please join the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco in honoring the memory of the thousands of individuals still buried in this land. So, Dr. Sally Katz is the Assistant Curator in the Achenbach Center for Graphic Arts at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, with sole responsibility for the museum's photography collection. She holds both an MFA in photography and a PhD in art history from Université Paris I Panthéon-Sorbonne, and before joining the Fine Arts Museum, served in a variety of curatorial roles at SFMOMA, the Fondation Cartier-Bresson, and in the photographic archive for the Department of Antiquities at the Musée du Louvre. She has organized exhibitions at the Fondation MAPFRE in Madrid and Barcelona, and at the Southampton Arts Center in New York. Since joining the Fine Arts Museums, she has spearheaded the acquisition of numerous photographs, including works by Carlton Watkins, Walker Evans, and Carrie Mae Weems, and has served as presenting curator for Paul McCartney, Photographs 1963 to 1964, The Eye of the Storm. Her lecture today draws on research into the museum's Northern California photography collection, conducted in preparation for her original upcoming exhibition, Boom and Bust, which will open this October at the DeYoung. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this kind introduction, Emily. And thank you for organizing this curatorial lecture series, A Closer Look, where we offer a deep dive into the collections that are housed here at the Legion of Honor. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in public programs and in AV for making this program possible. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about photographing Northern California's boom and bust. Almost all of the photographs that will be on view in the upcoming exhibition that I'm curating, titled Boom and Bust, Photographing Northern California, are drawn from the Fine Arts Museum's permanent collection of photographs contained in the Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts. The exhibition will open at the DeYoung Museum this fall on October 18th and will run through June 7th, 2026. So before I dive into the topic of boom and bust, I'd like to tell you a little about our permanent collection of photographs and a bit about the technical evolution of the medium in the 19th century. The collection began in the early 20th century with both the DeYoung and the Legion of Honor building their own collections. These collections were combined and housed at the Legion of Honor within the Department of Works on Paper, the Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts. And when the two institutions merged to form the Fine Arts Museums in 1972. Today, the collection comprises over 5,000 photographs that span the entire history of the medium. The majority of the collection consists of work by white, male photographers, reflecting the normative forces prevalent at the time they were acquired. But it also contains many important contemporary pieces that more fully reflect the diverse backgrounds and lived experiences of the people in the area. As the first curator assigned exclusively to photography to be appointed by the museum, after Julian Cox, who also oversaw the collection of photographs as part of his role, it is my goal to continue the museum's mission to make the collection more inclusive and to offer a wider range of perspectives and voices. So the collection is periodically on display at both the Legion of Honor and at the De Young, and as photographs are light sensitive, they remain on view only for a limited amount of time. And the museum's collection contains works that reflect the development of photographic techniques over time and the different processes that have existed and continue to be used within the medium. We are fortunate enough to have a work by William Henry Fox Talbot, up here, often credited as the originator of modern photography, who invented the calotype process that involved oiled paper negatives, patented in 1841. So here is a beautiful example of a work by Talbot of Sir Walter Scott's monument, which was acquired by the museum during Robert Flynn Johnson's tenure as curator of the Achenbach. So we have numerous daguerreotypes, the first commercially successful photographic process, which was invented by Louis Jacques Mondet Daguerre, and introduced worldwide in 1839. And the images, which existed on a mirrored surface, were often housed in elaborate, velvet-lined cases that reflected their prize status among elites. So here is a representative example of a daguerreotype made by Southworth and Hawes. So the development of the tintype helped to popularize the medium, making photography more accessible to more Americans. The American Civil War contributed to the popularity of the tintype, as these less costly photographs could be easily mailed to and from the soldiers on both sides of the conflict. Here is a tintype of a Union soldier by an anonymous photographer, encased in an elaborate frame to commemorate his service. And here is an example of the late 19th century carte de visite, which further democratized the medium. Carte de visite, like this one by André Adolphe Eugène Didery, their inventor, were albumen prints that were glued onto cardstock, even cheaper to produce and often exchanged between friends. And so it also allowed the public to collect images of celebrated figures. And so although known for its prominent collection of 19th century photographs, both European and American, the collection spans the history of San Francisco and the Bay Area and constitutes both the inspiration for and the source of images that will be on view in Boom and Bust. And so the earlier photographs in this exhibition are typically albumen prints that were made using glass plate negatives, while the later photographs show the development of techniques that range from gelatin silver prints to modern color photographic processes. So now let's dive into the topic of Boom and Bust, the subject of today's lecture and my upcoming exhibition at the De Young. So since the 19th century, California has been considered a land of opportunity, offering a promise of prosperity that really drove westward expansion by white settler colonists in pursuit of a new frontier. It was the site of the gold rush, and today is the epicenter of technological innovation. At the same time, all of the region's inhabitants did not experience opportunities equally. From 1846 to 1873, European Americans decimated California's native populations, among the densest indigenous settlements in North America before European contact. Since the advent of the medium, photographers have used the camera to bear witness to the urban construction of the California landscape, unceded native land, as well as the destructive environmental forces that threaten its habitability. The images testify to an impulse to master or impose order on the natural world and expose the tension between the attempts to tame a wild landscape and nature's power of resistance. The photographs chronicle the ebb and flow of urban settlement in the Bay Area, from the impact of the discovery of gold on Coloma Nisenan land at John Sutter's Mill in 1848, the fire that followed the 1906 earthquake, the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge, to the development of San Francisco's South of Market neighborhood and the tech boom of the early 2000s. Drawn from the museum's permanent collection, the photographs in this exhibition reveal the cycles of growth and decline that remain part of the story of Northern California. They set out to capture the pioneering spirit of the region and the ability of its people to innovate and to reinvent themselves at times of both boom and bust. But more than anything, the exhibition attests to the continued resilience of this land and of its inhabitants. So the enterprise of photography and the popularity of the daguerreotype coincided with the gold rush and the ensuing westward migration of white settlers and the development of San Francisco from a small settlement to a major metropolis. Photographers capitalized on the influx of people moving to California seeking gold and financial opportunity, establishing photography studios in the cities of San Francisco and Sacramento and the neighboring gold mining towns. They not only now had clients for a burgeoning portrait photography business, but also captured the breathtaking landscapes that contributed to crafting and advertising a romantic myth of Northern California in the popular imagination that lured people to settle and develop this land. So originally inhabited by the Ohlone Ramaytush people, the area on which I stand was claimed by the Spanish, who named it Yerba Buena in 1776, meaning good herb. After the conclusion of the Mexican-American War in 1848, the region passed under the control of the United States. The settlement was renamed San Francisco, and it became a city in 1850. San Francisco's rapid growth can be attributed to the California gold rush, which brought tens of thousands of prospectors in the hope of making themselves rich. In the lithograph on this slide and on the following one, we see scenes from the gold rush depicted, framed by an ornamental border. The miners saw themselves as pioneers, prided themselves on their rugged individualism, and they conceived of themselves as fulfilling what John O'Sullivan termed the nation's manifest destiny. For many, the Western lands were virgin territory, empty of population, and they were setting out to tame the wilderness. For others of these settlers, they were the bearers of civilization to the indigenous peoples whom they saw as less civilized. Of course, for the Native Americans who had settled in California for hundreds of years, the arrival of white settler colonists meant the end of their ways of living, the destruction of their communities, and even genocide. So the California gold rush began in 1848 when James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, northwest of Sacramento. But in the course of 1849 alone, the population of California increased tenfold, from 10,000 non-native residents to over 100,000 by the end of the year. The white settler colonists arriving in search of gold were known as the 49ers, and they came to California by sea, often crossing the Isthmus of Panama to shorten their journey, and by land, traveling westward across the United States. The gold rush was vital in California's pathway to statehood in 1850 and also spurred the decimation of indigenous populations in the region. The gold rush fueled the growth of towns and cities, most notably San Francisco, which soon became a major port and commercial hub in the region. At the time, as we will see later on in the century, artists and photographers celebrated what they saw as the entrepreneurial, industrious, and innovative spirit of the miners, ignoring the impact of the gold rush on the native population. It was the gold rush that made possible the rapid growth of the city of San Francisco. This image here by Carlton Watkins captures San Francisco in 1868, only 2 decades after the discovery of gold, and it shows the city expanding outward into the surrounding undeveloped land. Oh, sorry. Although best known for his images of Yosemite, Watkins was also an important chronicler of San Francisco, where he worked out of studios and galleries on Montgomery Street. In the photograph from 1868 here, Watkins offers a vista of the city expanding into undeveloped land, with the downward sweep of the hill and the half-built road emblematic of the city's inexorable progress. The stepped houses on the right, with their regular forms, reflect the desire to impose order on the natural world, while the houses on the left are scattered haphazardly and most likely are waiting to be torn down. You can see the pier jutting out and into the water and the Marin headlands in the distance even, emphasizing the importance of San Francisco as a maritime city. The photograph, like much of Watkins' work, is tonally rich, with contrasts between the pale sky, the lighter surface of the road, and the deeper, richer tones of the earth. While the city Watkins photographed in his view of Telegraph Hill in 1868 was expanding rapidly into what its white inhabitants regarded as the wilderness that surrounded it, less than 20 years later, he was able to photograph a mature metropolis, complete with the attributes of most modern cities at the time. Although the boom was not continuous and punctuated with periods of bust, the last 3 decades of the 19th century were a time of continuous expansion and saw the city take on many characteristics that define its identity today. In this image, Watkin gives us the city in its pre-earthquake prime. The streets have been built and cobbled. The tracks for the city's iconic cable cars are embedded within. The first cable cars had entered service in 1873, traveling along Clay Street, the first of 23 lines established between 1873 and 1890. Watkins captures an established, affluent city, complete with streetlights and telegraph lines connecting it to the rest of the world. Here we see Market Street, which remains a major thoroughfare and a demarcation by which other areas of the city are defined. We regularly speak of south of Market, for example, to designate the area below it. So Watkins had his studio on Montgomery and Post Street, and he often photographed his neighborhood. In this picture here, in contrast to the 1868 photograph, the vanishing point is found within the city itself, capturing its vastness as the urban landscape recedes into the distance. The ghost-like images of the people on the sidewalk in the right-hand side of the image, which I hope you can see, suggests that Watkins used a long exposure that failed to capture the passing of pedestrians. Most importantly, the photograph evokes a sense of permanence. In reality, most of the buildings Watkins photographed would likely have been destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. The city's population, despite periods of economic bust, naturally continued to rise throughout this period, reaching 300,000 by 1890. In 1847, just to give you a sense of the city's rapid growth, it had numbered less than 50. So at the same time, photographers set out to document and to celebrate the commercial growth of their city and its place within a growing national economy of the United States. So the growth of San Francisco also coincided with and was fueled by the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and the expansion of rail systems throughout California. The Southern Pacific Railroad was founded in San Francisco in 1865, anticipating the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. Over the remainder of the century, the Southern Pacific Railroad became a major rail network that extended across the Trans-Mississippi West. The railroads were important drivers of immigration, as tens of thousands of Chinese laborers were drawn to California to work on their construction. This image here shows the Oakland Pier terminus, which was constructed on landfill in the 1880s and became the most important rail terminus in California. It spurred the development of the Oakland area, which until the terminal's construction was, for the most part, predominantly woodland. At the same time, San Francisco emerged as the most important maritime hub on the West Coast. So the wharf has been central to San Francisco life since the city's earliest beginnings. The Pacific Mail Steamship Company was established in 1848, and its first voyage from the East Coast brought hundreds of settler colonists who had traveled to Panama to board the ship after news of the discovery of gold had reached them. The company had the US government contract to carry mail, and it also brought a large number of Chinese laborers into San Francisco. PMSS helped build trade between the United States and Asia and contributed to the development of the city. The wharf made San Francisco a magnet for Asian immigrants and consolidated the city's position as a major economic hub on the West Coast. So building a city required raw materials. And in the second half of the 19th century, Californians became increasingly aware of the beauty and grandeur of their natural environment at the same time as they continued to regard it as a natural resource that they wanted to exploit. Thus, photographers like Edward Muybridge sought to capture this majestic mammoth tree of Yosemite, a symbol of permanence, creating the almost mythic status that Yosemite continues to hold in the popular imagination. In contrast, others like Hester, whose photograph is on the right, documented the lucrative logging industry that supplied lumber to build America's homes. And given the attitudes of the time, photographers erased the presence of Native Americans and the fact that Western settler colonists were exploiting resources on land that had only decades earlier been under the stewardship of indigenous peoples. So as the city grew, its richest householders took pride in their often magnificent dwellings. The owners often employed photographers to document their homes and, by extension, their wealth, social status, and good taste, measured by the extent to which it aligned with the Eurocentric norms of the time. So these two pictures are from an album that is a photographic record of a single stately building located at 605 O'Farrell Street, characteristic of the Victorian architectural style that emerged between 1849 and 1915 and would become a defining hallmark of the San Francisco landscape. The gold rush led to a boom in population and a demand for housing that reflected the status of the city's wealthy elites. The homes often featured ornate exteriors, vibrant colors, and carefully crafted interiors. Muybridge cataloged the building, recording the exterior from various standpoints and highlighting the opulent interior decorations. Here we can see in the image on the right, the entrance hall with its magnificent staircase with a reproduction of the famous statue of the very newly, at the time, discovered Augustus at Prima Porta in Rome, its Orientalist vases, and its rich Victorian carpets. The album is a portrait of a home, of Robert C. Johnson's home, a place clearly lived in and made possible by the city's booming affluence and burgeoning population. The furniture is all ornately decorated, from the fine carving of the banister itself to the almost monumental terminal balustrade. Like many in the area, the building was likely destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. So the late 19th century saw the development of the notion of leisure. Americans of all classes looked to recreational activities to fill the time they were not working, a need that spurred the development of amusements like Coney Island in Brooklyn and parks in most of America's cities. So San Francisco's famous Cliff House, shown here, was built in response to the demand for recreational spaces with which the city's population could fill its leisure time. Home to restaurants and bars, the Cliff House was a major destination in the 19th century, a gathering place for San Francisco high society that offered unparalleled panoramic views of the Seal Rocks and the Pacific. Built in 1863 near Ramaytush Ohlone Midden, or Shell Mound, the Cliff House was remodeled and expanded. The house is neoclassical in style, and it remains one of the city's outstanding landmarks. Watkins's photograph on the left depicts the original house, which was remodeled in 1896, whereas Willard Worden's photograph on the right captures the short-lived second Cliff House, which was destroyed by fire in September of 1907. But both photographers create a harmony between the human-made house and the surrounding natural environment, suggesting that the new presence of human beings in what they frame as an uninhabited space somehow aligns with and even enhances its beauty. The current building was completed in 1909, and it has undergone multiple restorations. Now no longer in operation, the Cliff House remains nonetheless a mythic part of the city's landscape. So these photographs here by Isaiah West Tabor document the transformation of Golden Gate Park from a rural site to a center for civic life and public amusement for the 1894 Midwinter Fair, an event that drew on racial stereotypes in its commemoration of California's colonialist past. The two pictures shown here by Tabor, along with the rest of the pictures he took of this event, were the first group of photographs to be acquired by the museum in 1895 on the occasion of the founding of the De Young Museum the previous year. In the image on the left, Tabor, who is the official fair photographer, depicts the site before construction, with Sweeney's Observatory just visible at the top of Strawberry Hill. In the subsequent photograph at right, Tabor deliberately omits all signs of the natural world, choosing instead to photograph the site at night, highlighting both the human ingenuity and the technological progress that the fair set out to celebrate. Conceived at a time of economic depression, the fair was meant to offer new recreational activities, create new jobs, and restore a sense of optimism to the city after the bust of the 1890s. So in this photograph, restaurant workers pose proudly next to a luxury Marmon automobile that embodied the way that cars became not only a form of transport, but also a status symbol and a popular leisure activity, as San Franciscans used their cars to drive to recreational destinations on the weekends. In fact, most automobile ads at the time stressed the potential for cars to fill leisure time rather than as practical modes of transportation between the home and work. Here, the workers are in the process of boiling the crab that lies at the heart of San Francisco's culinary traditions. Originally designated for commercial fishing boats, Fisherman's Wharf soon became known for its seafood restaurants. At first dominated by immigrants from southern Italy, after World War II, the culinary traditions expanded, and the area became the thriving tourist hub that it is today. Under pressure from the expanding tourist industry, the fishing industry recovered from the bust of the 1960s and 1970s. Rebuilt after the 1989 earthquake, the wharf is now home to San Francisco's fishing fleet that brings in herring, salmon, and crab to be processed on site where the Ohlone peoples used to fish. So the history of San Francisco is punctuated by natural disasters, often caused and exacerbated by human activities that degrade and imperil the stability of the natural environment. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake and subsequent fire obliterated at least 80% of the city. 3,000 people lost their lives, and many thousands were injured and left homeless in its aftermath. The event was witnessed and recorded by a number of photographers, most notably Arnold Ganthy, whose entire collection of negatives of these earthquake photographs, together with numerous prints, were acquired by the Achenbach Foundation here at the museum in 1942, and the works were recently published in a book by our department. Ganthy captured the fire in progress as the inhabitants of the city watched like spectators at an outdoor event. Here in the image on the right, we can see multiple generations of San Franciscans looking on helplessly as their city burned and huge plumes of smoke arose from the burning city. In the image on the left, we can see how the mostly wooden buildings have been destroyed by fire, leaving only 2 stone churches standing. Ganthy also, I know this picture is so great, both of them. Ganthy also focused on the physical damage to the city's buildings and infrastructure, capturing the homes literally uprooted from their foundations and the cobbled streets that were upturned and twisted by the force of the quake, as in the photographs shown here. And I love these leaning Victorians, pretty iconic. Ganthy also focused on the physical damage what drew their attention was the human cost of the disaster, focusing on the human tragedy that unfolded in its aftermath. For example, photographers like Willard Worden, like in this photograph here, turned their lenses on the tent communities that sprung up across the city. to house the displaced people who had lost their homes. And here, an anonymous photographer chose to capture the hundreds of displaced people gathering outside Crocker's pop-up restaurant in Union Square, desperate for a warm meal as their homes and kitchens had been destroyed. And so here we have this really incredible album that has about 268 photographs compiled from the earthquake that are all various photographers together in one compilation. And so this album, it was put together in the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake and fire and was arranged chronologically. The earlier photographs capture the grandeur and beauty of the city before the disaster struck, before its narrative then continues with images of people struggling to survive its impact. The final photographs document the devastation that remained after the fire had burned out. The earthquake and fire imposed its own periodization in the city's history. When one looks back into the past, time is instinctively divided into before and after the earthquake and fire. The album was created by an unknown compiler who chose to end before San Franciscans gradually rebuilt their lives and communities out of the ruins. So natural disasters have continued to shape the history of the city. The 1991 Oakland firestorm began on October 19th, and by the time it was brought under control 4 days later, it had cost 25 lives and destroyed over 3,000 homes. Richard Misrach photographed its aftermath, working alone as he strolled through the burned-out city. This view here from the hills, looking down at the destruction, shows damaged homes, scorched earth and trees, and the lingering smoke that gives a hazy atmospheric quality to the image. Misrach chose to keep his pictures away from public view until 2011 out of respect for the fire's victims. But today they resonate with us more than ever in light of recent environmental emergencies in California. And this huge immersive photograph, it's measuring approximately 95 by 119 inches, is almost apocalyptic in its impact, evokes the precariousness of our existence and the fragility of an environment that Native peoples had successfully preserved for centuries through anthropogenic fire practices. So when people create a visual image of San Francisco in their minds, they evoke the cable cars, hills, Lombard Street, Alcatraz, and of course the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge, constructed at the same time, are part of the city's commitment to building infrastructure necessary to allow the city to grow. In this 1915 photograph by Willard Worden, he captures the Golden Gate before construction of the Golden Gate Bridge in the 1930s. This picture was taken from the Cliff House and captures the emptiness of the bay, with a few scattered buildings in the distance, most notably Fort Point. And while San Francisco is now a vast, sprawling city with surrounding suburbs, in the early 20th century, the boundary between city and the natural environment around it was more clear-cut. Fort Point today is the location of the base of the Golden Gate Bridge on the San Francisco side. So construction on San Francisco's iconic Golden Gate Bridge and Bay Bridge began in 1933. American photojournalist Peter Stackpole captured the scale and complexity of the projects, celebrating the role of thousands of workers involved. The images are beautiful, modernist works of art, as Stackpole composed his shots to juxtapose the geometric beauty of the bridges with the landscapes of the wider city. Stackpole masterfully uses negative space, and his workers are silhouetted against the sky and the city, capturing the energy, determination, and courage that they brought to their work. Stackpole immersed himself in the ongoing construction, relying on his own physical strength and prowess to secure the perfect vantage point for his shots. They are a record of an extraordinary feat of engineering. that geographically unified the Bay Area and has become a visual icon synonymous with San Francisco and the Bay Area. And so while the bridges allowed cars to drive across the bay, San Francisco was also at the forefront of the nation's development of an efficient national, and eventually international aviation network. So Mills Field Airfield was opened in 1927, and until passenger flights became more common in the 1930s, it was used primarily by Boeing Air Transport to fly mail between San Francisco and Chicago. In this aerial photograph, we see the neat biplanes lined up beside a grass runway and wooden hangars. In less than a decade, there would be almost 800,000 square feet of concrete runways and taxiways that would be lit with modern lighting powered by underground power lines. In 1930, the city purchased an additional 1,112 acres from the Mills estate, and the airport was renamed San Francisco Airport the following year. It continued to expand after World War II, welcoming the new aircraft of the jet era and making San Francisco an international as well as national hub. As well as monumental infrastructure projects, San Francisco, like almost every American city, experienced an outward expansion as suburbanization spread across the nation after World War II. The return of millions of GIs sparked a demand for housing that was met by building new suburban housing. Suburbanization was made possible by the new prefabricated and streamlined construction techniques pioneered by developers like William Levitt and funded by low-interest mortgages guaranteed by government agencies like the Federal Housing Association. These new neighborhoods were segregated as the developers prevented Black Americans from purchasing homes and were fundamental in merging existing ethnic identities into a broader category of whiteness that continues to shape our society today. For returning white GIs, the new suburbs offered access to the American dream and the opportunity to move out of America's crowded cities. Politically, it created a new class of homeowners and committed to low property taxes and convinced that their success in life was the result of their own efforts, when in fact, as many scholars now recognize, federal loan subsidies were the most significant and most racially unequal instance of government welfare spending. So in the late 1960s and early 70s, Bill Owens began photographing his neighborhood of Livermore, California, documenting the phenomenon of suburbia and the suburban lifestyle. His eventual Suburbia project became a landmark series in the history of American photography. This photograph here shows the bulldozing of a lot, capturing the industrial construction methods that made suburban communities possible. Owens captures the destructive impact of suburbanization on the California landscape and the conformity that the suburbs engendered by its uniform houses and privatization of domestic life. San Francisco today and in the past has been home to a wide range of cultures, races, ethnicities, and gender expressions, although often different groups have faced prejudice, discrimination, and even violence. San Francisco's Chinatown was the first in the United States and remains the largest Chinatown in North America. Ever since the 1970s, and with special intensity from the mid-1890s, San Francisco city officials had tried to forcibly remove the Chinese from Chinatown. But from its earliest days, it was a vibrant, thriving community, despite the discrimination and prejudice Chinese immigrants faced when they arrived in California before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 closed the door to future arrivals. The architectural style, with its elaborate balconies, ornate carvings, and lanterns, culturally and aesthetically demarcated the neighborhood from the rest of the city and continued the culture and traditions of its inhabitants. While Arnold Genthy's work on the right is almost, and his whole series is documentary and almost ethnographic even, Willard Worden on the left creates a more mystical scene by capturing the glow of the lanterns and the strange eeriness of the largely empty but still illuminated street. The creation of Chinatown was a significant moment in American history, and it retains its vital place within the fabric of the city. In more recent years, as the city has experienced the tech boom that began in the 1980s and escalated in the 1990s, low-income and ethnic communities have faced pressure from gentrification. Landlords saw the booming economy as an opportunity to raise rents, and developers looked to raise existing neighborhoods and replace them with new office buildings, retail stores, and higher-end luxury apartments that few ordinary San Franciscans can afford. In her South of Market series, made in the late 1970s and early 1980s, photographer Janet Delaney documents the transformation of her neighborhood as buildings were demolished to create sites for new construction. SOMA became the epicenter for developers building out the area as a future center for business and technology. In her later SOMA Now series, made from 2010 to 2022, Delaney returned to the area nearly 40 years later to document the same sites, hardly recognizable now, revisiting her neighborhood over time to bear witness to the changes taking place. Her work shows the cycles of urban renewal and the impact of gentrification on the culture and the people of the area, such as the artists, queer people, and working-class Filipino and Black families who were her neighbors. The now booming SOMA came at the expense of the destruction of the existing community. The development of SOMA involved the displacement of thousands of lower-income San Franciscans as the existing residential buildings were razed to make way for office buildings and luxury apartment complexes. These two images, taken in 1979 and 2015 respectively, capture both the mechanisms and consequences of gentrification. In the earlier image on the left, residents protest against landlords evicting their tenants in order to sell their buildings to developers. In the later image on the right, the polished advertising touts the advantages of the luxurious new office building under construction. The title of the work, See Further, echoes the advertisement in the left of the image and at the same time evokes the expansionist myths that drove the development of the West in the past. As Delaney stated, reflecting on the changes she observed and documented, quote, "There is no one moment where everything in a city is finished. Cities grow, decay, begin again. Some aspects of city living change slowly and others rapidly. San Francisco was established at about the same time that photography was becoming widely used, the 1850s, so the city has a long photographic record." I just love that quote. For Catherine Wagner, the construction site is a metaphor for change. Here she documents the construction of San Francisco's Moscone Convention Center. After trespassing for a year, Wagner finally gained permission to photograph the site, capturing it at different stages and from a multitude of angles as if she were a surveyor. Wagner sees her work as archaeology in reverse. She shows the skeletal forms of the steel rods that will be encased in concrete, only to one day perhaps be revealed again in the future when the site will become ruins again. Wagner is interested in the theater of construction, bringing out what she sees as the operatic elements in play within the shifting boundaries of public space that echo the cycle of boom and bust within the city and the constant change taking place in our physical universe. In this work, a recent acquisition that was among the 63 photographs gifted from the Pilara Family Foundation, Daniel Poster further explores the impact of gentrification. Here, he contrasts the physical decay of San Francisco's Mission District with the cultural vibrancy and energy represented by the graffiti that covers the walls and the buildings in the area. The image is part of Poster's series Boomtown. The title is not merely ironic. The abandoned building, likely to be demolished as part of ongoing gentrification in the area, has become a site to display the booming creativity of the area's predominantly Latin population. Poster invites us to look at the urban environment as a vehicle for cultural display and to reevaluate our assumptions about what constitutes urban development and progress. In many of the images I have shown, the photographers set out to document the city they saw around them and to celebrate or protest against the changes that were taking place. But photography as a medium can be a way of framing the past, of imposing an interpretation of history that validates and endorses existing elites. I began by rooting the growth of San Francisco as an urban space in the gold rush, which uncovered vast mineral resources and brought white settlers rushing to California. So finally, as I've said before, the gold rush that began in 1848 triggered a major migrational shift as thousands of people moved to California, white settlers especially, invading native people's land in search for wealth and opportunity. So by the end of the century, the gold rush had entered the popular imagination as a nostalgic fantasy, as evident in these photographs taken by Isaiah Tabor at the 1894 Midwinter Fair. Staged in Golden Gate Park, the fair recreated and sanitized scenes from the gold rush for a presumed European-American audience, stressing the rugged individualism of the pioneers and perpetuating historical mythologies by constructing a false memory of the period. The gold rush was framed by white Americans as the origin story of California, something to be celebrated and honored as the century drew to a close. But as with most narratives from the time, the images ignore the presence of the indigenous peoples and the devastating effect that the gold rush had on their communities. So many of the photographs in this exhibition reflect the values, assumptions, and biases of their white photographers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who largely erased indigenous peoples from the land they occupied. They feed into teleological and Eurocentric notions of progress and the spread of what they regarded as civilization. I would urge you to keep this in mind as you visit the exhibition and as you see the highs and lows in our city's past. Ask yourself the question, boom and bust for whom? At the same time, I hope that I have conveyed the qualities of resilience, creativity, and rebellion that make San Francisco unique among American cities. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. And if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Thank you. So I'm really surprised that what was left out of this presentation is what was really happening for Chinese people in Chinatown in 1903, or what's really happening in the mission now with the Latino population. And it just feels like it hasn't been brought up to 21 level. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it sounds like, you know, it was history through the eyes of somebody in 1950 or something. I don't know. Just, I don't understand why that wasn't included.
What? So, first of all, I'd like to, as I mentioned in the beginning,
I can't hear you.
I don't know why. Maybe the exhibition and the lecture here is all based on works drawn from the museum's permanent collection. So I'm confined by the available works that we have in the collection. So of course, while this attempts to cover a vast period of time, it necessarily is going to be a bit reductive in that it can't, you know, you could do a whole topic on any one of these subcategories. Yeah, so I showed pictures that we have.
Of history, not to leave all that out. That's the mistakes we've been doing from the past. Those are the mistakes we've been doing from the past, is leaving out what the real history was.
Well, that's why I also urge at the end as well to be thinking about who is telling history, how is history being told, what is being included, what is being excluded. These are all very important questions and is central to to this, of course, thank you. And I did touch on Chinatown, but of course there's so much richness, complexity, and history that I can't delve into in a 45-minute presentation, but, and that's based on works from the collection. Thank you.
Thank you, that was wonderful. My question is that I know you're restricted in this presentation and also in the exhibition to the permanent collection here, but are you aware of other collections that feature and showcase some of the communities that this lady referred to, particularly the native populations, the Ohlone populations? Is there anyone that captured and did marvelous photographs and staged exhibitions of those populations?
I mean, but the most well-known name within the history of photography, who most notably photographed indigenous populations, was Edward Curtis, who made a really kind of ethnographic project documenting the peoples of those various communities. It's very interesting and very problematic work as well, but does, provide sort of a thorough catalog. But, there were not, the history of photography at the beginning of it was dominated by white men, that's who had access to pursuing this type of work, which obviously changed later on and is continuing to change. So unfortunately, there isn't a large representative body of voices telling history, and so that's also why I think it's very important to call attention to the question of who is being represented and who is doing the representing, because a lot is left out, which is why I repeatedly called out what was the erasure. I wish we could repopulate those images or put cameras in the hands of other people, but unfortunately, that reflects the histories of what happened in this country, too. And so I think talking about the exclusions is important as well. But it would have been great if we could have featured work by indigenous photographers early. I did. I talked about the erasure. I did many times. Well, yeah. Repeatedly, I repeated myself many times. Thank you. And I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Hi, Sally. Thank you so much for that beautiful presentation. I really appreciate it. Also, just the subtle changes in the identity of the photographer. I noticed as we got more to the present, you're featuring women. And I'm curious as to how you see, the changes in the photographer's own self-perception of who they are and what they're doing. From my limited art history course, I think I remember in the early stages of photography, photographers thought of themselves as they were chemists, they were scientists, and how did someone like Watkins see himself? Was he like an ethnographer, anthropologist, artist? Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that since the beginning of the medium, photographs are very aesthetically interesting, and I see works from the 19th century as works of art, not just as documents. But I don't know how. I can't, obviously ask how a photographer many years ago would have identified themselves, but I don't think the impulse was for a purely artistic impulse. It was more for a documentary impulse, a journalistic impulse, or a political impulse, various, utilizations of the camera. I think today photography has been affirmed as a fine art medium, and I think also here in San Francisco, the establishment of Ansel Adams' photography program at the CSFA, now then SFAI, in the 1940s, was the first of its kind to really assert photography as not just as craft, but as fine art. And so that marked a shift in terms of how photographers conceived of themselves. Of course, earlier in the first half of the 20th century, there were artists who were working experimentally and creatively with the camera, from a purely artistic standpoint. But I think when it entered maybe more mainstream consciousness as such, could have been at that time. That's certainly around the time when many major museums were founding their photography departments and began collecting photographs as they collected other works in other media. But I think there's always been an artistry to it. So I would look and evaluate a photograph, from the 19th century in the same way, using the same aesthetic tools and vocabulary that I would a photograph made today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin Katz, a wonderful presentation. My question to you is more about the upcoming exhibit starting this October. What was the process for you like as the curator to decide what to include and what not to include?
That's a great question. So for me, given that this is also my first exhibition here at the museum that's based and drawn from the permanent collection, it was really a great opportunity for me to do a deep dive into the collection and look through what do we have, what are the strengths of the collection, what are the gaps in the collection, and really make a good kind of assessment at first. And I also was thinking about, in doing the first show, what would be a topic that would resonate today. I think it's important that we think about not just interesting ideas for exhibitions, but ones that resonate with our current moment. And given that the collection is very strong in in 19th century, early 20th century photographs, but does span the whole history of the medium through today, I wanted to do a show that is transhistorical just in the same way that the collection itself is, in a way that would allow us to draw parallels from the past to the present and think about how the past resonates in our current moment, given what is going on culturally, politically, everything. And so I also think it's important to be, telling stories that are meaningful for our local community. That's this is our audience. So it's important. I think it's interesting to think about and look with a critical eye as to what is our history, what is the landscape, the land that we're living on, and how has that been documented through photographs. So I wanted to do something local, something relevant to the here and now, and that really also allowed me to pull out some really nice pictures from the collection. There's a lot of really nice pictures, but some really terrific gems, and as I said before, creating that thread from the past to the present. And hopefully, given rhetoric today, people have been talking about the doom loop and then San Francisco coming back. I started thinking, San Francisco's really a boom and bust town, and these kind of peaks and valleys throughout our history. And so that sort of felt like a story that would ring true today.
Yeah,
Sure. Hi.
The undertaking that you've done is really amazing, because to go through 175 years of San Francisco, it's impossible to do in one exhibition.
Yeah.
And it's just a great tour from the 19th century to the 21st century, and by definition, you have to leave many things out, either because you don't have the material in the collection, or because you can't cover everything. So I applaud your effort. I think it's really wonderful for San Francisco, for the museum, and for the future. There will be other exhibitions like this that will build upon it and expand. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.